Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Finally getting back into creating some Halloween themed cards. So I pulled out this Impression Obsession pumpkin cup stamp set that I had shown in a haul video weeks ago. I've had so many people asking when I was going to use this set. So I decided to pull it out today, and I'm using some Canson XL watercolor paper, and I've lined it up in my mini Misty here. And I wanted to stamp the little like whipped cream image first, which is what I did. And then I had stamped and cut out a little mask of that from some Post-it paper and then masked it off. And then I'm inking up the main image. I lined up the cup so that the whipped cream would be perfectly kind of centered there. And I'm using my mini Misty for this because I had known I'd probably need to stamp that image more than once because of the solid parts of the face. So I stamped that a couple times, and then before I remove my mask, I'm going to stamp the little cinnamon stick image from this set. So just stamping it and made sure to cover the cup portion as well because the mask wasn't big enough to cover everything. And then when I remove the mask, everything is all perfect and fabulous. That's one thing I love about masking. It all looks like crap until you remove the mask, and then it's like, oh, okay, this is what I'd wanted. This is how I'd wanted it to look. So did that, and I did it twice. I thought since I had everything out, why not make 2 cards at once? So I taped down both these pieces just to one of my big cutting boards. And then I pulled out this Prang watercolor set that I showed in another Halloween video, which I will have linked at the end here. This is a really, really affordable watercolor set, like few bucks. I think I picked mine up at the grocery store. I'll have links to someone. There's a Crayola set that's very similar to this, and they're just decent little watercolors. So I decided to use that today. So I kind of pre-mixed up the colors I wanted to use, and then I've super sped up this process. Altogether, it took me, I think, maybe half an hour to do all of the watercoloring. Not too long. It just kind of depends really how involved you want to get and how many layers and that sort of thing. I kept everything fairly simple. I just started with the like base of the cup itself. I did orange, then I did a brown for the cinnamon sticks, and decided to do the handle brown because the handle's kind of basically the stem of the, pumpkin, and yet it's the handle. I don't know. To me, that the way it was drawn, it looked more like it should be brown. So did that, did the leaves, dried everything quickly with my heat tool just to speed up the process. And then I added a second layer of orange that I deepened with a tiny bit of brown to the cup. And then just a deeper shade of brown to the cinnamon sticks and to the handle. And I would just add the darker color, then I would clean off my brush so that all it had was clean water. And that's when I would pull the color out and kind of smooth everything out. So I did that, did the same thing with the leaves, dried it again with my heat tool. And then I really watered down the brown so it was just very, very pale, and added just a little bit of detail to that whipped cream there. And then I'm going to go in and do my background. And this pretty much nearly took as long as everything else. I just used black for the base here and just laid that down, dried that with my heat tool, and then added a second layer to look more almost like a shadow around these little mugs here. Nothing too crazy. It was the main area of the background that took the longest because I went in, and of course this is when my camera died, or my camera battery died. I went in with clean, just water first, nothing, no watercolor, anything. So it doesn't really look like anything, but that got the cardstock wet so that when I went and dropped in this kind of yellow color, it moved around a lot easier because I kind of wanted a fairly soft background. Nothing too fancy. I just didn't want to have to work too quickly with the watercolor itself. I wanted it to just move. So going ahead and wetting everything first with just clear water makes it go faster, if that makes any sense. So I did that with both pieces. It wasn't perfect, but I just kind of wanted that nice light yellow color in the background. And then again, when everything's completely dry, I cut out another mask for the whipped cream, but this time I cut out from the center of a Post-it paper because as I was doing this idea occurred to me, and I was like, I want to add a little bit of splatter to the whipped cream to make it look like, cinnamon's been sprinkled on top. So to achieve that, I created that mask, cutting out just center. So I'm using the negative portion of that mask so that all that's exposed is the whipped cream. And I'm going to use a few more pieces of my Post-it notes here to cover up these other areas because I don't want to get splatter anywhere else on this image. I only want it on that whipped cream. So I made sure everything's covered. And then I just put a bit of that brown watercolor onto an acrylic block here. And then I'm going to flick my brush against the edge of the acrylic block fairly lightly. I don't want it to be, great big huge blobs of splatter because I want it to look like a little bit of just a really light sprinkle. So I did that with the first piece, and then I'm going to just lift up that mask I created and move it right on over to the second one. And then I lightly set the negative of that other mask I created. It's not really touching because that watercolor is still wet, but I just wanted to make sure again that I didn't get any like just random splatter onto those images. So created my little bit of splatter here, and then I'm going to lift this out of the way and then let it all completely dry. And then I pulled out my Copic opaque white and added a little bit of that to an acrylic block, and I watered down just a smidge, just a little bit, just to make it a little more workable. And just used my brush to add just highlights and that little bit of detail to this image. And by the way, my brush, it's a Zen, where did I put it? I have it here. It's sitting right here. It's one of the Royal and Langnickel Zen brushes. This is a size 6. So even with a size 6, I can get a very detailed, like it has a very detailed tip to it. So I was able to add those little tiny little highlights. I used that one brush for this entire thing. These brushes are $3-4, like very affordable. So I've been enjoying using them. So I did all my little, highlights and that with it. And then of course I had to add a little bit of white splatter too, just to finish everything off. So I just gave it that little something something. So again, let it completely dry, removed my tape, die cut it with one of the Simon Says stitched rectangle dies. And then I set that aside. And I pulled out the Impression Obsession Cover a Card background that I'd also got at the same time I got the stamp set. This is the Webs one. I just love the design on this. So I've got it face up on my desk. I inked it up with Simon Says black dye ink, and then pressed on some slate gray cardstock. And I'm just using a random piece of scratch paper here so that I don't get a bunch of black ink all over my hands, and then pressing down really, really well so that I get that transferred onto the cardstock. And I've said this, I said this in a recent haul video too, when I actually got this dye ink. I'm obsessed with like black stamped backgrounds on gray cardstock. I just love how it looks. So I did that with both pieces, and I'm cleaning this up with a baby wipe. And just FYI, if you're having trouble with certain inks, black inks always, doesn't matter what formula, are usually more of a bear to clean. I just sprayed a little bit of my Ultra Clean stamp cleaner directly onto the stamp, and it's amazing how much more this will clean up. If you don't have a bottle of Ultra Clean in your stash, I highly recommend it. I have been using this stuff for years. It's fabulous. It really cleans off all those stubborn inks and that. Like, I don't mind staining, but you don't want ink residue left on your stamps when you go to ink them up with something else. So I did that, set that aside. I have this scrap of orange cardstock here, so I grabbed the Happy Pumpkin Day sentiment. And the first time I stamped it, it doesn't look like it on camera, but I didn't like how it stamped. It didn't stamp perfectly. So I just flipped it over, inked it up again, stamped it once on the bottom, and then lined it up and stamped it again along the top. I realized I could fit both onto this one piece. So I stamped it, and then I grabbed that same stitched rectangle die and die cut this because I wanted that stitch edge on the one end of these sentiments. And I'm going to cut that in half with my paper trimmer, and then I'm going to trim off the other end, the little stitch end there, because I don't want that. So I'm just going to trim that off with my paper trimmer as well. And then I grab my scissors, and I'm just going to cut a notch down the center of this, and then meet up each corner with the center of that little notch that I'd cut, so that each of these is going to have a little flag end with stitching on the one side. So I did that with the second one, cut off both those little corners, and then I'm going to adhere these to my little watercolor pieces. So I'm just using my Xyron Mega Runner here and adding adhesive to the back of this, and then I can line up the little stitch edge with the stitch edge on these watercolor pieces. So I got that completely lined up and adhered to both of them. And then the pattern paper I'm using, which is kind of what inspired the colors and why I did the yellowish background, is the Pebbles Midnight Haunting, which I used in another previous video. So I used the plaid pattern just to give a little bit of a border on these images. And same thing, I just decided to adhere it with my Xyron Mega Runner. I did think about popping some of these layers up with foam tape. That would give it, some extra dimension. But I plan on using some puffy stickers, so I thought that would be enough going on this time. So I just adhered these flat to the pattern paper, and then I'm going to adhere these to those backgrounds that I had stamped earlier. And I die cut those backgrounds with the largest of the Simon Says Stamp A2 rectangle dies, like they're basic rectangles. The largest one is an A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I adhered all of that, And then for the inside of my cards, I just have more of the pattern paper from that Pebbles pack. And I'm just adding the adhesive to that and then lining them up along the bottom of the inside of the card. And then I can flip that over and just trim off the excess with scissors. So I do that to both card bases. And then I'm going to stamp the other sentiment from the set, the "You're as sweet as a pumpkin spice latte." So I'm going to ink that up with that VersaFine ONYX black again, and then stamp that onto the inside of both cards. And then now I can adhere my card fronts to the card bases. So again, I'm going to run my Xyron Mega Runner around the perimeter of these and then a little bit just down the center. And then I can line these up right onto my card bases. And like I said, this die is A2 size, so this will completely cover my card base. So just making sure I had everything lined up. So I caught both cards with their card fronts on them. And then I have these Pebbles Midnight Haunting puffy stickers that I got when I got the pattern paper. They're so cute. So I decided to add the little bats to that, and you could totally use the little eyes, but I didn't like how they were going to look with this. I like the eyes like on the stamped image instead. So I added the little bats, I added some little candy corn, and then when I was looking at it, I'm like, that little vine on the handle there, I'm like, that would look really cute with the little spider puffy sticker hanging from it. So I pulled those off and adhered those and decided to move the little candy corn. So I quickly, carefully moved those before they had a chance to really stick down onto that paper and ruin everything. So press those into place, and that finished off my cards. So I will have a link below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used. That will be in the description box directly below the video. So you can check that out if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.